As I mentioned in a previous video, we are going to start looking at using MySQL from a web interface. And in order to do that, I want to take a look at some of the underpinnings. So we're going to look at moving around and operating in a Unix environment. So I'm sure we're all familiar with Windows, but this may be a little bit different. And there's quite a few things we need to learn. This is all going to be a command line interface. I am accessing a Unix server, Ubuntu version of Unix. There's different flavors of Unix available. We will be using Ubuntu in our class. And I'm accessing this through a program called Putty, which I will show you how to set up and get running in class. But for now, we are just going to start learning some um, command line commands for getting around. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is the first thing I want to do is see where I am. So I'm going to print working directory. And I am in the home for, I am the webwork administrator, so I'm at home for myself. And when you first log in, this is the directory that you're going to come into. So it's going to be for home and then whatever username you happen to have. And then if I want to list the contents of that directory, I can do that. And the command I often use is list with an L option. So all these commands have multiple options, but I'm going to go through just some basic stuff here. When you list things with the L option, then you get a complete list of directories and files inside your directory. At least files and directories that you have permission to see. Anything in blue, at least in PuTTY, is then a directory, and anything in white is a file. Notice that we have here the last touch date, the size of the file in bytes, and then what we have here are permissions. So this is the owner of this file is www.admin, and then this is the group that has access to this file. So you can define groups. So when I get when you gain access to this server, then you'll be put in a group called students, and then we'll have some files that are accessible to all students in the class, and then we'll have some files that are only accessible to you. If they're only accessible to you, then you will be the owner in the group. If they're accessible to you, and if it's something you create for the class, then you would be the owner and the group would be students. Okay, over here on the left, these are actually more permissions. So these are the permissions for the user. So the user in this case has read and write permissions, and so that's the first three. And then the next three are, no, I'm sorry, that's not correct. The first letter here is whether this is a directory or not. So this is a dash because this is a file, and then D for directory. That's the next three. These three give the permissions for the owner, and the order is read, write, and execute. So this tells you whether the owner has permission to read this file, to write to this file, and to execute this file. Don't have permission to execute this, which is fine because it couldn't be executed anyways. It's not an executable file. Then the next one we have is the group permissions, and in this case, I think I said owner. Technically, it's user, you. All right, so user group has also read-write permissions, and then other, and in this case, other can read this. If we look at the desktop folder, then we see some executable permissions given. I don't know how you're going to execute a directory, but you have permission to do so if you're the www admin. Again, so user, group, and everybody else. All right, so this is something that you really need to know when you're operating in Unix is about permissions, because you run into permissions issues, and setting permissions is very important, especially if you're maintaining any kind of web server. You want to make sure that only your web page has access to your information and somebody can't from the outside come in and hack. So this idea of permissions is going to become important and something we'll be talking about in the future. All right, so you can change permissions if you want, and the command to do that is chmod. All right, so let's see. I want to chmod, and let's see. I want to give right here, I'm going to give other write permissions. So we're going to do chmod other. We're going to add write permissions, and then this is going to go to check latex.awk. Okay, so you can see that the simplest way to add a permission then is to just do a plus sign and write this out. It turns out that all these permissions are coded in binary, and you can go ahead and figure out the correct binary code to put in here, but I think this is the easiest way to do it. So if we do this and then execute and do another list, we see that the others now have write permissions on this folder. And then if I want to take them away, in PuTTY, if you hit the up arrow, then you can go back through the list of previous commands. So I hit the up arrow once and I get that list command that I just executed, and then if I go back one more time, I get that mod, and I'll just take the permission away by doing O-W and do another list. And then in terms of groups, then if I wanted to, I can change groups here using a change group command. And there's always a root user. So the root user has permissions that other people doesn't. So I'm going to change group to root examples.desktop. And this will give you an idea how you might change groups from yourself to students or something like that. Oops, and I don't have permission to do that, change groups to root. Oh, let's see, what other groups do I have on here? Well, I have root, so you're going to learn something else. So I can do a sudo. Now, I can do a sudo because it turns out, have permissions to act as root on the server. So the root user is the all-powerful user on the server, and they can do anything they want. They automatically have permissions to read, write, delete, anything they want. And if you have permissions on another username, then you can switch users over. So I'm going to switch user do and change this group so I can show you how the change group command works. I don't have the student group set up yet. Otherwise, I would just switch it over to that. And it's going to want a password. And hopefully I got it right. Nope, I didn't. Try one more time. Okay, now let's take a look at this group. And so now this is switched over to group, and then I can change it back. Once you've done a sudo, then you don't need to put in the password again. Put it back to www.admin. You might ask, well, why don't you just always do things as the root user, since that gives you all this power? And part of the reason for not always acting as root is I'm acting as www.admin right now. If I act as root and I make changes to files, then it may change the group or permissions on the file to root, and then anybody else trying to access that file is going to have some big problems. All right, so what do we learned so far? We have learned about looking at the contents of a directory using ls. We have learned a little bit about permissions and groups. We've learned how to change the group. We've learned how to change permissions. And now the next thing we're going to learn how to do is to change directories. So change directory is a cd command. And if you just do a cd dot, then actually what happens is nothing. You stay in your current directory. Let me do this again. Print working directory. And then I'm going to cd dot, print working directory. Now you might say, well, what's the point of that? Well, because if I wanted to change to the desktop directory, then one way to do that is to relative to the current directory. So that's what this dot means, relative to the current directory. Go to the subdirectory desktop. And then we can look at what's going on in desktop. And, well, not much. Now, it turns out in this case that we could just also cd to desktop. Oops. Okay, so we can change directories. You can also change directories with respect to the root directory. So with respect to the root directory, that takes you to the top level directory. And so if I do this, then we're in a top level directory. And if I do an ls now, I'm going to see all kinds of things. Oh, we got all sorts of interesting things going on here. Some things that we probably had not ought to be messing around with, to be honest. All right, so there's that home directory that we were in. So I can go cd back to home, get back to where I started from, because this is getting a little scary being out here in Never Never Land. All right, so we can cd back to home. Then we could, what's going on at home? Let's see, there's a www.admin directory, so I'm going to cd www.admin like this. So now I'm back to where I started from. And if I cd back to the root directory, then it could actually go to, let's see, instead of doing two separate commands, you can type out long lists like this. And that puts us back into the home directory. And notice that when I do this, I'm doing this relative to the home directory. And it turns out I also know that there is a subdirectory called opt webwork2 relative to the home directory, so I can change into that. And then if I want to, I can go back to okay. Let me take a brief pause here. So I think that's going to be the extent of this video. And then in the next video, we're going to learn how to manipulate files, move files around, delete files, create files, edit files, and that sort of thing. So welcome to Unix.